Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Alex, reading Book 3 from Allbyon to Britannia, The Last Wizard. In the last chapter, they fended off an attack of the nasty mob, and Sebastian said he'd had some sort of transformative experience. And we're about to hear about that in Chapter 13, Sebastian and the Green Woman. Sebastian's story. When I returned to my flat after we had rescued Leia and Ada, I did not want to have anything to do with anybody. I felt responsible for other people falling into a trap. I felt stupid that I'd been caught out twice by a bunch of people who I knew were not that bright. There was also another feeling that took a while for me to identify. My first action was to cast a warding spell both on the front door and on the balcony. I'd never bothered with the spells when I was at home before, but now I wove the strongest spells I could muster. Of course, the flat was still in a mess from the break-in. People had picked up books and put them on shelves and tidied things up. These were signs that people cared about me and had made me feel a little better, but nothing was where it belonged. I sat and stared at it for an hour, indulged in a bout of deep self-pity, and then started to get it all sorted. Excuse me. Excuse me. The worst mess was in the kitchen, where they had ripped the cupboard off the wall. The cupboard itself was fixable, so I propped it in a corner. I cleaned up all the cornflakes and porridge oats and a couple of smashed jars of pickle, put all the rubbish in bin bags and took them out to the rubbish chute. I almost forgot the warding spell and wasted time trying to work out why I couldn't get out of my own flat. There were some ready meals in the freezer, so I made myself something to eat. Then I put the book of spells in my study and added another layer of protection to make it even more difficult to penetrate. I couldn't stay in my study. I would have had to think about things I couldn't handle. I watched a cooking competition on TV and then went to bed. I slept for a long time. It was odd waking up in my own bedroom after all that had happened, but I felt more able to think. I considered going to the cafe on the corner for breakfast, but I still felt I needed to be on my own. I snuck down and went to the supermarket to buy provisions, then scuttled back home. When I closed the door of my flat behind me, I identified the unknown feeling. I felt exposed. I'd managed in this world for 350 years by keeping myself secret. People might see me around and even know my name, but there were very few people who had ever known I was a wizard. Now there were unpleasant people who knew who I was. There were also great people who knew who I was. I counted them all. The Blacks, Brenda Brown and the nasty mob, that was 6. Father Joe and Rose made 8. Miles and Ruth, Steve and Emily made 12. Marco made 13. Unlucky for some. But then I had forgotten the other members of the Albury Triangle Residents Action Group and the spy still living in the Triangle. I presumed that the private investigator Mrs. Brown had employed had not been told why she wanted me followed, so he didn't count. Since being catapulted into this world, there had never been so many people at one time who knew I was a wizard. So, I said to myself, it's time to move, time to change my name again and my appearance. I was enjoying wearing Steve's suit. Perhaps I'd buy myself a trilby hat, dye my hair. And then I remembered Miles. I had acquired an apprentice. At this point, I'm ashamed to admit I had a struggle. I did not want an apprentice. I did not think I deserved to have an apprentice, and when I thought about Miles, I thought about Steve and Emily. I had friends who were the parents of my apprentice. He turned to me. It wasn't that I did not want to teach you, Miles. I did not feel capable of doing it, and felt I didn't deserve friends either. I was feeling thoroughly sorry for myself. Finally, I entered my study and sat down at my desk. There was the book of spells. Well, there was at least one spell in it that I'd failed to remember when I'd started the replacement copy after the war. Were there others? I had, in fact, got a backup copy of my present book of spells on another flash drive, which was locked in a secret drawer in my desk. I'd been more worried about electronic failure than I had about having my old book stolen. Work you enjoy can be a wonderful place in which to lose yourself when feeling low. I started to methodically leaf through every page of the book of spells and compare it to the spells on the flash drive. Apart from eating snacks, making cups of tea and sleeping, I did little else for the next 4 days. Sounds quite nice. Anyway. Finally, about lunchtime on the 4th day, I was satisfied that I had finished. There was nothing in the book of spells that was not now incorporated onto my backup flash drive. I must remember to update the one Miles has. I said to myself. I locked it back into the secret drawer and cast an extra protective spell on it. I sat at my desk and looked at the book. It had been so familiar to me for so long. I remember the bookbinder who had made it for me, at some time in the 18th century, his workshop in Shoreditch. I had told him it was for the inventory of my estate in Wales. I always seemed to be drawn to Wales. I remember how I was dressed as a gentleman of leisure at the time, with knee breeches and lace cuffs. I recalled the soft leather shoes with little heels and silver buckles. Now I had an assortment of Converse bumpers and Doc Marten boots. The book had caused so much trouble. The fraternity nearly destroyed the world by using it, let alone what Brenda Brown had done to me with it. It was time for it to go. I needed to burn it. It's the only way to successfully destroy a book of spells. I thought of throwing it in a furnace somewhere. Perhaps I could get access to one in a hospital. But I knew that for my own peace of mind I had to see it burn, page by page. I needed to see it with my own eyes that it had finally gone. However, I live in a flat in Hackney. I could think of nowhere nearby where I could burn it. Even Victoria Park has signs everywhere saying no barbecues, and this would take a bigger fire than that, and it would take a long time. I thought of bringing it over to the Triangle and burning it in a brazier in Miss P's back garden, but I could not quite face my friends just yet. Marco would help me, I knew, but this was something I needed to do on my own. So I decided to take a trip to somewhere wild and remote, so that I could get it done in peace. I thought about going to Hampstead Heath or even Epping Forest, but neither was wild enough. This island that is my home is so full of people nowadays. Where could I go? In the end, I remembered a place that I had been to with Marco. We'd gone in his mate's old Jaguar one sunny day last summer. It was not wild in the sense of primeval forest, but wild in the sense of abandonment. An airfield by the sea on the edge of Essex. It had been built in the Second World War, but never used since. There were always plans to develop it, but the roads were bad. There was no railway station nearby. The plans never came to anything. I never found out why Marco knew about it. Some dodgy smuggling operation, probably. The runways had been dug up a few years ago to stop travellers settling, and it was being reclaimed by the scrub that would grow and transform it into a forest like the Great Forest that used to cover these whole islands if it was left alone long enough. I looked up the best route on the internet. The nearest station to the aerodrome was several miles away. I decided a walk would do me good. I got up early the next morning, packed the book of spells in an old backpack with a pack of lighter fuel from my Zippo lighter from when I smoked, and a thermos of coffee and cheese and onion sandwiches. I went to Liverpool Street, bought a day return, and arrived at the station at about noon. The walk got me to the edge of the aerodrome in about an hour. I found a gap in the wire netting and scrambled through. I looked around. I was totally alone, except for the fairies. Ruth had opened my eyes to them, but there were no fairies in my part of Hackney. They were everywhere and seemed delighted to see me. "What are you doing here, big wizard?" they kept asking me. So in the end, once I'd moved away from the fence and found somewhere secluded, I told them, "I have come here to burn my old book of spells, so that it cannot cause any more trouble." As we know, all fairies know that what any of them know, so they knew what had happened at Temple House. I was interested to know how much they knew about what happened in the past, but they seemed to only have short memories and no sense of history. Anyway, surrounded by rustling and chattering fairies, I dug a little pit for my fire by the side of a ruined wall so that it would be safe from the wind and hidden from anyone who might be travelling along the road, though that was unlikely as the road petered out by a muddy creek a few hundred yards further on. I found dried twigs and branches and set my fire. Then, and it took an effort of will, I started to tear out the pages of my book of spells one by one and feed them into the flames. I knew it was the right thing to do, but I'm not ashamed to say that there were tears in my eyes. Page after page burned away in the fire. Then I became aware that the fairies had gone quiet. I looked up. The fairies had gone, and there was a woman sitting beside me. I didn't hear her coming. She was just there. At first I thought she must just be someone from nearby, but when I looked at her, she smiled and said, "Good afternoon, wizard. This is a good thing you are doing, though it brings you pain." "Who are you?" I asked. How do you know who I am? How do you know what I'm doing?" I looked at her carefully. She was barefoot, wearing a daisy chain necklace and a green dress. She had long dark brown hair tied back with what looked like a braid of grass stems. I seemed to be suddenly presented with yet another person who knew who I was, a barefoot hippie. "On your feet cold?" I asked her, but I clutched the remains of the book to my chest in case she wanted to steal it away. "My feet are fine." She wiggled her toes. "I like to dress up, like you do. Don't worry, Sebastian Jones, last wizard of old Albion. I mean you no harm. I mean none of you any harm. You are keeping my witch safe, and for that I thank you." "Who do you mean? Rose? Ruth?" "They are my witches too, by adoption. But I was referring to Leia. She is my witch. Your apprentice and his mother were very courageous. They took her away from the nasty pair and the nasty mob. You have been feeling so guilty about sending them into danger, but they did it of their own free will. You are not responsible for everything and everyone. You are the last wizard of old Albion, but you are no longer the last wizard. There is a next wizard, and next witches. You and Rose Cooper have survived in Britain for 353 years, but times are changing, times have changed, times change. Tenses are so confusing. You will change." "And how is that going to happen?" I said to her. "We're as stuck as we were when we came here, stuck on this island, stuck at the ages we are. Nothing has made any difference in all these years." "Your apprentice. There is a task for him. For his magic to grow and develop in these lands, he will have tasks of his own to fulfill, and the first is coming soon. He will need you to guide him." I turned to feed more pages into the fire. "How do I do that?" I asked, but when I looked back she had gone. There was just a mob of tiny fairies, their tiny eyes reflecting the flames like sparks. I asked them who the lady was, but they just giggled and wouldn't answer. I asked them what she meant, but they just giggled some more. In the end, I burnt every page of the Book of Spells, but kept the outer covers. Leather and board are hard to burn. It might say Book of Spells on the front, but there were no spells within to be stolen and misused. When all the pages had gone, I raked through the ashes to make sure there was not the tiniest spell left. Then I covered them over, ate my sandwich and drank my coffee while the fairies watched. I gave them a sandwich and they treated it as if it were a banquet. When we'd finished eating, I put the empty covers into my backpack with my thermos flask and went home, all the time wondering what on earth I was supposed to make of the woman in green. I got back in the early evening, though it seemed like days had passed. I bought myself a sandwich. No, really sorry. I'm just a bit exhausted today. Let's start again. I bought myself a takeaway on the way home. I was ravenously hungry. As I ate, I realised I was in a much more positive frame of mind, because I had a problem to solve. That always cheers me up. I think you're the same, Miles. I also seemed to have made an unconscious decision about something else. Keeping myself secret when they were burning so-called witcheries was no more than sensible. But this was the 21st century. People believe everything and nothing. Some people don't believe what's before their eyes. Other people believe almost anything they read in the newspapers. So, I'm a wizard. Some people would believe I am what I say I am just because I say so. Other people wouldn't believe me if I turned their grandma into a rabbit before their eyes. I was sick of caring one way or the other, and I had to work out what the mysterious woman meant for Miles's sake, and for the sake of wizardly magic in this land. I considered where I might start. "So where are you going to start?" Dad asked. "Steve, at this present moment I have no idea, but I assume it will become clear in time if we keep our eyes open." "Especially keep our eyes open for barefoot hippie in a green dress," Dad said. "Meanwhile," Sebastian continued, "we have still got to work out who has been spying on you and deal with Mrs. Brown and the nasty mob. Previously, I would have assumed that they were all so scared now." Well, that's the noise of someone losing their place. But they were all so scared now that we would never see them again. But I don't think we can afford to make that assumption now. He stood up suddenly and started to pace up and down. "And we need to work out how Miles can be a wizard's apprentice in the 21st century. When I was an apprentice wizard, I slept on the floor of the kitchen of my master's tower. I walk down to the village every morning to get a pail of milk and 4 eggs. I don't think that's part of the national curriculum or A-levels or anything else educationally acceptable. Okay, well that is Sebastian Jones's story. What is this task that Mars is going to have to do? Will I be able to read the next chapter with slightly more elegance and sense? I can't even talk, so it's unlikely. But anyway, I'll see you then.